Now, I want to talk to police officers at 888-971-SAGE. The question is, in the case of the Sacramento officers who shot and killed Stephon Clark, a black man who did not have a gun. He had a smartphone that the officers apparently mistook for a gun. Body cam footage from the two officers show him in a residential backyard. And here's part of it.
Hey, show me your hands! Over here. Hey, show me your hands! Stop! Stop! 5-7 south. Show me your hands! Gun! Show me your hands! Gun! 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 Five, 7 shots fired. Subject down. Show me your hands! See your hands! 5-7, he's down. No movement. We're going to need additional units. Come in from the west to east of this yard. Let's see your hands! You all right? You hit? Yeah, I'm good. All right. He was still pointing. Oh, shit. When I saw again. You all right, dude? Yeah, I'm all right. I don't think I'm hit or anything. I got him at gunpoint, dude. Right. You wanna? What you wanna do? A tactical reload, okay? All right, copy. I think I shot about 5 times. Stand by. Stand by on that. He's still down. He's not moving. We can't see the gun.
Now, the body cam footage from the two officers who shot Clark, by the way, in his grandmother's backyard, shows a chase, shows one officer shouting gun. It also covers the aftermath. Backup arrives. The officers walk to the street. During the exit, one officer says, "Hey, mute." Then the audio on both cameras goes silent, but the video continues to show the authorities responding to the scene. Now, as to why the officers muted the cameras, the police chief, Daryl Hahn, who's been described as a black man, said that he couldn't explain it. He said there were, quote, various reasons, close quote, why officers would turn off their cameras' audio, but he wouldn't say if the Clark shooting was one of them. The muting, he said, would be part of his agency's investigation of the shooting. And when he said he's turning over the investigation to the California Department of Justice, he said they were also would be reviewing their tactics and practices as well. Now, when other authorities were asked about this, for example, Cedric Alexander is a former police chief, Rochester, New York, and a former public safety director in DeKalb County, Georgia. He said he saw nothing wrong with what happened procedurally. He said attorneys would advise officers to do that, to avoid recording comments that could be used against them in administrative or criminal proceedings. The police spokesman, Sacramento, Sergeant Vance Chandler, declined to say why the department decided to activate the mute function on the cameras. He said officers are taught during body cam training to utilize mute in certain circumstances, but he wouldn't say what those certain circumstances were. Quote, "That's part of what we are looking at this incident. We want to determine if this was appropriate time for them to mute it or not." Close quote. Jim Bierman is president of the Police Foundation, which helps departments with their tactics. Here's what he said about it. Quote, "My guess is one of them is about to ask what happened, or he has a compelling desire to tell his friend what happened and why he did it." He says he doesn't see anything unusual about this. Quote, "There's a void in many agencies' policies. I would be surprised if they were not soon filled in response to the Sacramento incident around the muting." He said that many departments have no policy one way or the other on when to mute. Some cameras don't allow muting, some do. I want to hear from officers. 888-971-SAGE. I'm Larry Elder.
Larry Elder, all true.
Elder. Wilson, Edie, the Clark family may not have filed suit or a claim against the city yet, but legal scholars say you can count on it, and a settlement could be reached even before a lawsuit is ever filed.
After 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot and killed by an officer in Ferguson, Missouri,
His parents in the St. Louis suburb agreed to a $1.5 million settlement. Benjamin Crump represented the family. After an officer shot and killed Tamir Rice in Cleveland, the family agreed with the city to a $6 million settlement. Crump was their lawyer, too. Now he represents the family of Stephon Clark. But McGeorge law professor Mary Beth Moylan says when it comes to police shootings, no case is the same.
For each situation, for each case that arises, there are unique facts and circumstances. And
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. Local authorities in Sacramento say they're turning over the investigation of the shooting death of Stephon Clark to the state AG. They want an independent evaluation. They also want an evaluation as to whether or not they ought to change their tactics. The only thing problematic here, and I don't think it's even that big of a deal, is that the officers muted their body cams. You could still watch the footage, but you couldn't hear sound. And that's caused the family to believe that there's some sort of cover-up. The suspect is black. One of the officers is black. The other one has been described as white. The Sacramento police chief, relatively new on the job, is also black. And still there is a suspicion that there might be a cover-up. My question is to law enforcement personnel, 888-971-SAGE. Under what circumstances is it legitimate to mute your body cam? Lamar is a police veteran, San Jose, California. Lamar, thank you very much for calling the show. I appreciate it.
Sir, thank you very much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for what you guys do for us, please.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So, Lamar, what's the deal?
So this is the deal. You've got three modes on. I'm assuming they use the taser body cameras, and you've got the off mode, you've got the intermediate mode, and then you've got the active mode. The intermediate mode is what we're expected to put on once we suit up and get into that car. The reason for that is that it captures everything while you're on duty, minus your conversation, because you could be having personal conversations or what have you. But if you're just driving down the street and all of a sudden some car slams into you, and you're not going to a call or responding to a call or at a call, at least that body cam will capture that moment, and then you can go from there. Policy says that when we are responding to a call, when we get that call, pick up the mic, that's when we turn the body cam on to active mode. Now, also in training, through the administration, there have been some times when we were told it is best for us to put it on mute mode, and that's when we're discussing issues like tactical issues, certain issues or certain things are and are not privy to the public as to how we respond to certain things and the way we respond to certain things. Other things are post shootings like that. To be honest with you, I believe that the officers should have just shut down the cameras and then debrief the situation. At that point, then you meet with your attorneys, the representative from the district attorney's office, as well as your POA rep, and then you sit down and you discuss the situation and you write out your police report. But that is something that we're advised that we don't talk about on a body camera. That's documented for public purposes that they'll get before we even have the opportunity to sit down and document our part of what happened in that particular scenario.
Now, Lamar, I can understand exactly why an officer would mute it after something like this would happen. My question to you is, do you not see how this looks to the family? Do you not see how this looks to the community?
Well, I'll tell you what, police work is not a pretty job. And I realize how a lot of things look to the community, how a lot of things look to the family. And we're one of the very few professions that deal with situations that most people don't want to deal with because it's not pretty. Right. And it doesn't look good, and it doesn't always put you in a favorable light. But that's what we swore for. That's what we swore up for, and that's the job that we enjoy doing. I don't always appreciate or want to look like the good guy, and I realize sometimes I have to put the bad boy hat on, but that's just the reality of the situation and the job that we do.
Lamar, as I understand it, your department, San Jose department, was one of the first in the country to record officer stops by race. Every time you stop somebody, you have to put down the race of the person you stopped. I think you were one of the first departments to do that. And the idea was that black people are being disproportionately stopped, and now you have all this data, and the people on the left accusing officers of engaging in profiling still haven't been able to make the case, because when you stop somebody, there's a reason for stopping them.
Yeah, no, they haven't been, especially in a city that is diverse as this.
Right.
We've got certain areas that are populated by certain ethnic backgrounds.
Right, and Lamar, I got to run, but I know that the fact that you took down stops by race did not prove at all the idea that the police were engaging in racial profiling.
Larry will be right back. Stay tuned.
Now, in San Francisco, last year, the police chief required officers to document whenever they muted their body cams. The question is, under what circumstances is it legitimate for officers after a shooting to mute their body cams? 888-971-SAGE. I'm particularly interested in hearing from officers. Tony is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's also a police officer. Tony, thank you very much for calling. I appreciate it.
Hi, Mr. Elder. I am originally from Whittier, California, so we're Southern Cowboys.
Nixon country.
That's it.
That's right.
I'm a police officer in the city of Pittsburgh and have been for the last 24 years. We just recently started using body cameras in the last 3 years, and the issue is not uncommon. And what you're asking for us to shut off to mute our camera after the incident is over is just for officer protection, because just like anybody else, once that incident is done, it's going to be investigated. Mm-hmm. And if we're constantly being recorded, we are making statements that could be used against us. So even without the camera, we're not supposed to have any conversation with anyone until we seek counsel.
Why isn't that policy explicitly stated? Apparently, the city of Sacramento doesn't really have a policy one way or the other about muting, and whatever their policy is appears to be online. It says it doesn't mention muting at all. It says that officers should record, quote, any enforcement or investigative activity, close quote, until the operation has, quote, been reasonably concluded, close quote.
I can't speak for them. Mm-hmm. I don't believe we, as a department, have a specific policy about the after action. It's going to be more of a union personnel issue. Mm-hmm. I don't think the department can say that you have to mute your camera, because their interest doesn't lie in the officer. Their interest lies in their own liability.
Well, Tony, do you see the problem here? If the officer can mute or not mute, depending upon what he wants to do, the perception is going to be wrongly or rightly that the officers are conceiving some sort of story, concocting some sort of story.
It's just like your previous guest stated, it's just police work. Mm-hmm. The perception of what we do is always out there, and you can't change your perception. Nothing comes to light until you actually sit down at a trial or at a hearing, an open inquest, where you get to hear the entirety being told through testimony. Until that point, perception's always bad. I mean, it's a nasty situation to begin with.
Of course.
There's things that are going right now that new studies are showing that officers shouldn't even be giving a statement for 2 or 3 sleep cycles, mm-hmm. so they can remember clearly. Because mm-hmm. when we get that tunnel vision, our brains become so overwhelmed with everything that happened, especially when you're in a shooting, because it's so dynamic, and you take somebody's life or you shoot somebody, it's devastating. And your brain goes into protection mode. So departments want immediate statements, and now studies are showing that you have to go through that time of REM sleep so you can clear your head and start to remember things clearly. There's also issues about officers reviewing their tapes before they give a statement, because officers won't remember exactly at what point they pulled their weapon. Mm-hmm. Because of what's happening, how dynamic it happens, this whole situation going on. So it's not uncommon for us, for all the police officers out there. We all see it immediately. For civilians to try to understand that is really difficult, and that's why social media is so bombastic. Having these videos out is so hard for somebody that doesn't have the training or understanding to really comprehend.
Tony, take a minute and tell us about the 20 shots. There were 10 shots fired apparently by each officer, and people who are civilians who don't know police work are always appalled at the number of shots fired. Talk to us about that.
Having shots analyzed is difficult. I'm going to say, I can't speak for the officer, but those officers aren't going to remember exactly how many shots they fired. Mm-hmm. When you start firing your weapon, it's just a natural reaction. Some officers just fire once. Some officers fire and they reload, and if the person's still moving, they'll fire because you're supposed to fire until the threat is stopped. Mm-hmm. Why those guys did that, I have no idea, but it's not uncommon. Both those officers started shooting. Once one starts, the other one is backing him up and taking that shot. Those are things that only they can answer. But it's hard to say that you overshot somebody. And I know it's a very touchy situation when you start talking about why'd you shoot so many times.
Right.
It's just that natural reaction.
And Tony, to your point about the officers not remembering, I do remember one of them saying, I shot 5 times when apparently he shot 10 times. So you're right. It's heat of the moment, split-second decisions, and you're under a great deal of pressure. Tony, thank you for calling, and thank you for being out there protecting and serving. God bless you.
Thank you for your support.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. 2 officers in connection with the shooting of Alton Sterling, Louisiana. No charges will be brought. That when we come back, 888-971-SAGE. I am Larry Elder.